We're going to read the, not sure if this is the last, yeah, this is pretty much the last part of the story where Mariner is actually in Tonga, headed back home to England. All right, here we go. In taking leave of those with whom we have long resided, and whose ways and habits we have got accustomed to, whose virtues have gained our esteem, and whose kindness have won our affections, in leaving them and the scenes that surround them, never to return, the human heart feels a sad void, which no lapse of time, no occupations, no new friendships seems likely ever to fill up. All their good qualities rush upon the mind in new and lively colors, and all their faults appear amiable, weaknesses essential to their character. And when we lose a friend by death, we compare it, by way of consolation, to a long absence at a long distance, but it is equally just to reserve the comparison, and to say of a separation like this that it is as death, which at one cruel stroke deprives us of many friends. So this is Mariner leaving and him leaving Vava'u, and all the memories rush to his mind, right? Of the past, his experience of him being in Tonga these past 4 years, and how all that he could remember were the good things. All the weaknesses became necessary to their character and to their behavior, right? All the qualities, says all their good qualities rushed upon the mind in new lively colors. So when you're in a situation like that, perhaps you can't help but still have the heavy burden of captivity during the time you're there, right? And you're experiencing this, you're going to war, you don't know if you're going to die and go see your parents again, and everything is, your life is unsure. But now that he's leaving that place, all the good memories, nothing but the good memories come to his mind. Because it says, virtues have gained our esteem, and whose kindness have won our affections. In leaving them and the scenes that surround them, never to return of time, no occupations, no friendships seem likely ever to fill up. So nothing's going to replace his experience, because now it's all education to him now. It turned in from an experience and not knowing all the unsureties of life into, damn, that was a good experience, right? You got to give him that. Mr. Mariner, as he looked towards Vava'u, now fast declining in the horizon, experienced sentiments which he never before had felt to such a degree. His faithful memory presented 1,000 little incidences in rapid succession, which he wondered he had never before sufficiently noticed. The late king, though lying in the Faitoka of the ancestors, was now as much alive to him as his son, or Finau Fisi, or Halaapi Api, or any other friend that he had just parted with. He recollected how often, as his request, he had laid down upon the same mat with him in the evening to talk about the King of England, and having a long conversation. When Finau supposed him to be asleep, he would lay his hand gently upon his forehead and say, "Poor Papalangi, what a distance his country is off." Very likely his father and mother are now talking about him and comforting themselves by saying, "Perhaps tomorrow a ship will arrive and bring our son back to us." Dang. And Mariner now leaving Vava'u, and now in the distance, Finau Ulukalala in his mind is so alive to him now. And because the sudden change of situation from I am, burdened by this captivity to I am free, knowing that it was a good transition, and it wasn't, he's realizing it wasn't that bad. And for him to sit and remember that he used to lay at nights next to Finau Ulukalala telling him stories about England while Finau Ulukalala questioned him about society, about military, about government, about how things work in England, to the point where they have a conversation until they fall asleep, and then Mariner falling asleep, Finau Ulukalala gently touching his forehead and saying, "Man, this Balayan kid is for alpha, that he's far away from his family. Um, his mom and dad is probably hoping and praying that a ship comes and brings him back to England." So that's a great memory to have, and all it is memories. The ship is probably moving slow, and Vavat was probably moving out in the distance, and he's just like, man, all the good memories are just rushing back to him. The next moment, all the amiable qualifications of the present king presented themselves to his view. And as we have not yet drawn a character so well worthy to be noticed, we shall now attempt to display in its true and native colors, trusting that it will afford a considerable share of pleasure of the generality of readers. So he's going to be talking about Finau Moegangongo Ulukalala's son. Finau, the present king of Ava'u, about 25 years of age. 25? I had no idea he was that young. 25 years of age, was in stature 5'10", well proportioned, athletic, and graceful, his countenance displaying a beautiful expression of openness and sincerity. His features, taking them all together, were not quite so strongly marked, nor was his forehead quite so high as those of his father. Nevertheless, they expressed an ample store of intellect. But notwithstanding the benevolent mildness and play of good humor in his countenance, his eyes shot forth a penetrating look of inquiry from beneath a prominent brow that seemed to be the seat of intelligence. And Moegangon was always curious, right? When he got onto ships, he looked around the cabin, he looked around everything. All he wanted to do was learn. It was like he was walking through. I remember walking through the museum, or whether it's art, or where the dinosaur bones were back when I was a kid, and how curious I was. And that's how Moegangongo was to Mariner, as far as how all he wanted to possess was intelligence. It was knowledge. And he's magnifying it here. The lower part of his face was well made. His teeth were very white, and his lips seemed ever ready to express something good-humored or witty. So he always looked like he was ready to have a good, witty, humorous comment or comeback. His whole physiognomy, I guess he's talking about his anatomy, compared with that of his late father, possessed less dignity, but more benevolence, less chief-like superiority, but more intellect. His whole exterior was calculated to win the esteem of the wise and good, while that of his father was well adapted to command the admiration of the multitude. So he looked more like a nice guy, basically. Moegangongo looked more like a peaceful, probably more like Tupo Niwa was, where when you looked at Finau Ulukalala, Mariner said he was 6'2", Moegangongo being only 5'10", not too much far off, a few 4 inches. But when you saw Finau Ulukalala, you knew he was about business, where Moegangongo looks more submissive in a way for a leader. The character of his father was associated with the sublime and powerful, that of the son with the beauty and engaging. His language was strong, concise, and expressive, with a voice powerful, deep, and melodious. His eloquence fell short of effect compared with that of his father, but he did not possess the art of dissimulation. Ooh. So he said he may not have been as eloquent as Ulukalala, but he wasn't deceptful either. to where a politician may sound better than a business guy, but he was still about the business. He wasn't trying to fool anybody. And that's what business people do. They're all about the numbers, right? So they're not going to give you words of comfort to, just to make you feel better. No, he wasn't, he doesn't sound as eloquent and as intelligent, but he was honest. The speech which he made on coming into power struck all the Matapuras with astonishment. They wondered to hear so much eloquence tempered with wisdom, so much modesty combined with firmness, proceed from the lips of so young a man, and they prophesied well of him, that he would reign in the affections of his people, and have no conspiracies or civil disturbances to fear. His general deportment was engaging, his step firm, manly, and graceful. He excelled in all athletic sports, racing, wrestling, boxing, and club fighting. He was cool and courageous, but a lover of peace. He was fond of mirth and good humor, was a most graceful dancer, and passionately delighted with romantic scenery, poetry, and vocal concerts. These last had been set aside in a great measure during his father's warlike reign, but when the bands of professed singers at his house almost every night, and had a band of professed singers at his house almost every night. So he's saying that the graceful dancing and the passionate delight and the human romantic scenery and the poetry and the vocal concerts, Finau Ulukalala wasn't really into that stuff. But he's saying that when he passed during his own reign, that he revived them and had bands of professed singers at his house almost every night. He was a kava guy. He just wanted to hang out. He was more of a kava guy than his dad, who was a straight politician. He used to say that the song amused men's minds and made them accord with each other, causing them to love their country and to hate conspiracies. This is such a kava statement right there. For anybody to say for that statement right there, talking about I'm talking about the environment of Faikava and the music and the stories and the conversation and stuff. It says right here that Moyangongo used to say that the song amused men's minds and made them accord with each other. So made them unify in song, causing them to love their country and to hate conspiracies. And if you look around online anywhere in Faikava, as far as music is concerned, because I Faikava here, we're in Missouri, but especially on the Sundays, I'll hear the same songs here on Sunday that I hear in any of the Faikavas around the world. A lot of the same songs. Everybody has their own, different playlists or whatnot, but a lot of the songs are the same. They're unified in it. And they're unified in the behavior of the Faikava. They're unified in how nobody takes anything personal. They're unified in, regardless of what religion anybody is, the Faikava makes us one no matter what. All the walls are broken down, and there is no institution greater than just the institution of Faikava, which means we're all the same. We're all here together. We're all here doing this Faikava thing and being, close to each other, close to conversation, close to music, peacefully. And that right there sounds like the Faikava behavior. He was of a most humane and benevolent disposition, but very far from being weak in this respect, for he was a lover of justice. Why do I always have freaking nose problems when I read this book. I'm starting to think this book has something I'm allergic to. Maybe it's the age of the book. Because every time I open the book, my nose itches. It's probably coming off this book. I need to freaking check it out. Because it is old. Lover of justice. The people readily referred to him for a decision in their private quarrels, and on these occasions, he was never thought to have judged rashly. And the Faikava mentality or character is always neutral, or at least tries to stay as neutral as possible, not to care or worry too much about what's going on. But if you do ask them something, they're going to give you an honest answer from a non-discriminate point of view. They will just say, all right, what is what, this is what's right and what's wrong. They don't care who it is. They will be honest. And he says, and I think Moingang was the same way. Never thought to have judged rashly. If he could not immediately decide, he adjourned the cause till the next day, and in the meantime took the trouble to inquire further particulars from those who knew more of the matter. So if somebody went to him with an argument they had between two parties, if two parties came with an argument and brought it to him, and he couldn't have any much to say about it then, he would tell him, let's talk about it more tomorrow. Let me think about it. Then he would go look for guys, because Moingang was only 25 in the year 2000. This may have been 2010, since they got there in 05 or 6, so 09 or 1809 or 1810 at 25 years old. So he was really young. But anyways, coming to trying to solve problems and issues, he would go to some wiser people. Basically, it sounds like he would go to the other boys like, "Hey, what do you guys think about this?" No difference from going to a fight cover. Hey, these two people over here were fighting or arguing. What do you guys think about this? And get more information. That way, he can make a more even call, more fair judgment on it. Character sign of a good man. If he was severe with anybody, it was with his own servants, for he used to say that his father was too partial to them, by which means they had become assuming, taking upon themselves the character of chiefs and oppressing others of the lower orders. But now he would make them know their proper place. So where Finau Ulukalala, if you worked for him, if you were a servant of Finau Ulukalala, he would probably, spoil you and allow you to do things that you probably shouldn't be and act like chiefs if you're a servant. Where Moingang, he's putting everybody in their place. No, you're a servant. You don't get to act like a chief in front of me or just because of me. You don't get to use my name and my title, right? If they did anything wrong, they trembled in his presence. Nevertheless, the benevolence of his heart was wonderfully expressed in his manners. While he was yet on board the ship, Captain Fisk desired Mr. Mariner to tell him that it would be bad policy for him ever to attempt taking a ship, as it would prevent others coming to trade with them, or if they came at all, it might be to punish him and his people for their treachery. So Moingang was on the Port-au-Prince, where he was on the ship that just came. What was it called? I can't remember what the ship was called. But the ship that Mariner left on with Captain Fish, he was telling the captain, hey, look, it's bad form to steal your ship, because then nobody will want to come and trade with us, one, or two. So some other big ship may come and slaughter us for what we did. Let me go to the ACR. So we're talking about the servants. If they did anything wrong, they trembled in his presence. Okay. Nevertheless, the benevolence of his heart was wonderfully expressed in in his manner. While he was okay, tell us about the ship. As soon as Finau understood what the captain said, he made a step forward to Mr. Mariner and, taking his hand, pressed it cordially between his, saying with tears in his eyes and a most benevolent and grateful expression of countenance, "Tell the chief that I shall always consider the Papalangis as my relations, as my dearest brothers, and rather would I lose my life than take anything from them by force or treachery." Moengangon was a lot better Finau than Ulukalala was. Ulukalala, well, he was obviously a more peaceful and delightsome person, because he didn't have the same mentality as his dad, Ulukalala. The footnote says he had learned the action of taking the hand from the Englishmen there and used to say it was the most friendly and most expressive way of denoting one's feeling of sincerity. So that's why he took Mariner's hand, to show friendship and sincerity, that he really wants to be friends with the Palangis. He had scarcely finished speaking when the captain exclaimed, I see what he means. You need not translate that to me." Maria. So the captain saw he was crying and telling him, "Hey, kange captain ni whakatō a maudolo. We're brothers. E laka anke mate ke iegu whaiha mea kowe ka maudolo." That's basically what he's saying. Finau's intellect was also very extraordinary, that is to say, it was naturally strong, and was very little obscured by prejudices. We have seen several instances of the wisdom of his conduct, and a few anecdotes will serve to show that his specific reasoning faculty was far above the common. He had learned that the mechanism of a gun lock by his own pure investigation. One day, on taking of the lock of a pistol to clean it, he was astonished to find it somewhat differently contrived and a little more complicated than the common lock, which he had thought so clever and perfect that he could not conceive anything better. On seeing this, however, he was somewhat puzzled, at first with the mechanism, afterwards with the superiority of the common lock. But he would not have it explained to him. It was an interesting puzzle which he wished to have the pleasure of solving himself. There are little puzzle games on that they're selling on TikTok. They're pieces of metal that are hooked together, whatever. They're like puzzles. You got to figure them out. And then there's a certain way to unhook two pieces of metal, right? And they have different shapes and different ways, ways of figuring these things out. I'm sure he would have really enjoyed, which is something that just in the mind of somebody in a place like this back in the day, where locks, watches, there's complications in all these things, for him to sit down and want to just figure it out himself. And that's the way of all of them that come from Tonga too. When they come to look for work or do something, all you gotta do is kind of show them, and once they do it, they know it. And I guess a lot of people that come from a lot of countries with lower education or knowledge or experience and industry and whatnot will come to America, and for the most part, all you gotta show them. Look at all the Mikos. They come here, they tell you that they can do whatever it is that you're asking them to do, and eventually they put their hands on things and they figure it out and they become good at it. And then they build businesses. So, curious minds. At length he succeeded and was as pleased as if he had found a treasure. And in the afternoon at Kava, he was not contented till he had made all his chiefs and matapules understand it also. So he would figure some complicated thing out, like the lock, figure it out, take it apart, and figure it out, and then explain it at the Faikava, which is would have been a fun thing to talk about at a Faikava. He did not know the existence of the pulse till Mr. Mariner informed him of it and made him feel his own, at which he was greatly surprised and wanted to know how the Papalangis first found it out. He was informed at the same time that the pulse was influenced by various diseases and passions of the mind. Apparently, pulses in different contexts in here. And that in most parts of the world, those whose profession it was to cure disease often judged of the state of the complaint by the pulse. Oh, so he is talking about the pulse of the probably of the wrist or the neck. Upon which he went about to 2 or 3 that were ill to feel their pulses, and was much delighted with the new discovery. A few days afterwards, one of his servants very much offended him by some unwarrantable act, upon which he became violently angry, but on a sudden the thought struck him of the association between the passions and the pulse, and immediately applying his hand to his wrist, he found it beating violently. Upon which, turning to Mr. Mariner, he said, You're quite right. And it put him in such good humor that the servant got off with a mild remonstrance, which astonished the fellow very much, as he did not understand the cause, and was sitting trembling from head to foot, in full expectation of a beating. So one day, Mariner shows Finau Ulukalala how to feel the pulse. Another time, he gets mad at his servant, he's about to beat his ass, and during that whole, in the heat of the moment, the fury, he reaches down and grabs his wrist to feel his pulse, and then he looks over to Mariner and says, "You're right. The pulse does have something to do with emotion and anger and all that. You're right." And then the servant that he was about to punish, expecting a beating, was looking at him like, "What? What's going on here?" And then Finau gave him a tongue lashing or whatever. And then the servant runs away, but he's like, "I don't know what happened, but that was crazy." So Mogaongo was always interested in education, in that type of knowledge. And he was grateful for Mariner for showing him how the pulse coincides with emotion. Mr. Mariner explained to him the form and general laws of the solar system, the magnificent idea of the revolutions of the planets, the diurnal revolution of the Earth, its rotundity, the doctrine of gravity, the antipodes, the changes of the seasons, the herald light of the moon, the ebb and flow of the tides, etc. These were the frequent themes of discourse. They pleased him, astonished him, and filled him with intense desire to know more than Mr. Mariner was able to communicate. He was always learning. Boyago was always learning the whole time he was with Mariner. It's no different from Finau Ulukalala, who was always asking Mariner different things, and both astonished at how much Mariner knew, especially at such a young age. But we also read in the beginning of the book how educated Mariner was at that age because he went to a private school in England. So from the age of, can't remember how, it was young. It was like between 6 to 8. and stayed there till he was 13. So that was a good 5 years or so, 5 to 7 years, educated there before he even left England. So by then he was already educated. Plus he spoke a couple languages. I think it was Latin and a little bit of French. So Mariner was already armed with education and knowledge, and I'm sure they were astonished at how much he knew. He was amazed at the wisdom of the Papalangis and wished to visit them, that he might acquire a mind like theirs. That's always been something Tongans, even growing up, like to sound smart and all that. They loved it. They loved just knowledge. They loved just knowing things that nobody else knows, or knowing new things, or learning new things. They've always been that way. It's a very interesting part of their character. The doctrine of the sun's central situation, and the consequent revolution of the planets, he thought so sublime and so like what he supposed might be the ideas and inventions of a god, that he could not help believing it, although it was not quite clear to his understanding. What he seemed least to comprehend was how it happened that the antipodes did not did not fall into the sky below, as he expressed it, for he could not free his mind from the notion of absolute up and down, but said he had no doubt, if he could learn to read and write and think like the Papalangi, that he should be able to comprehend it as easily, adding that the minds of the Papalangis are as superior to the minds of the Tonga people as iron axes are superior to stone axes. He really complimented the Palangis. And of course, you got knowledge, you got education, and you tell such a great, you know, the progress of the Western world, of the civilized world, compared to Tonga back in those days. It's like astonishing. It would have been astonishing to anybody. For you to have that much knowledge beyond and outside of this world, the planets, the stars, rotations, the orbits, and everything, for these guys to be interested no matter what subject you talked about. It seemed like these guys were interested no matter what it was. It was just new information for them. He did not, however, suppose that the minds of white people were especially superior to the minds of others, but more clear in conscience of habitual reflection and study, and the use of writing, by which a man could leave behind him all that he had learned in his lifetime. Writing was amazing to him, which she's true. That it isn't just that the white man's mind was superior, but because of a lot of study, and which it was, Mariner learned from other people's studies, from other people's uh, uh, thinking and pondering and meditations and measurements and calculations and whatnot. And also, that boy Angongo said, it's a wonderful thing that they wrote it down for you guys so that you guys can have the knowledge that they discovered from before. Reading and writing is important. Right? Reading and writing is important so that you have the information that they already had, right? Where in Tonga and most of Polynesia, they didn't read and write. They passed it down orally. So they expected the story to be intact from the person that told the story first to the one who told it last, which we know that doesn't happen like that. You can't tell a story to somebody else. You're basically putting information from your mind, how you interpreted it, you're putting it into somebody else's mind. It's not going to interpret the same way. It never has. It never does. It has to be written down precisely as you intend it, so that the ones who read it will read it precisely in its context. And Moigangongo is realizing that it's a genius invention. It's a genius undertaking for the Palangis to have that reading and writing. One day, as Mr. Mariner was sharpening an axe and Finau was turning the grindstone, the latter observed that the top of the stone was not only always wet, but so replete with water that it was constantly flying off in abundance on the application of the axe. This, on a sudden thought, puzzled him. It seemed to him strange that the uh, superabundance of water should not run off before it got to the top. Mr. Mariner began his explanation thus. Oh, so he's talking about the grindstone, right? And if the grindstone is sitting in water and you're rolling it, the water will go all the way just based on the momentum itself. And while Finau himself was moving the grindstone, Mariner was sharpening the axe, and apparently Finau, his mind went to, how is it? He was thinking of the physical ability of water to move that way. And now Mariner's going to explain some science to him. In consequence of the quick successive revolution of the stone, when on a sudden Finau eagerly exclaimed, as if a new light had shot across his mind, now I understand why the antipodes do not fall off the earth. It is in consequence of the earth's quick revolution. Boingongongo realized that all on his own. This was a false explanation, and he soon saw that it was much to his disappointment. I guess it wasn't. So in this experience, he goes, Mr. Mariner began his explanation. In consequence of the quick successive revolution of the stone, when on a sudden Finau eagerly exclaimed, as if a new light had shot across his mind, oh, now I understand why the antipodes do not fall off the earth. It is in consequence of the earth's quick revolution. This was a false explanation, and he soon saw that it was, much to his disappointment, but it shows the activity of his mind and how eager it was to seize every idea with avidity that seemed to cast a radiance upon the object of his research. So Moigaongo was always thinking, always trying to figure something out. On another occasion, they were returning to Vava'u from the Hapai Islands, where the king had been to fetch some of his property, consisting chiefly of things which originally belonged to the officers of the Port-au-Prince. Okay, so one time they're returning to Vava'u from Hapai, where the king had been fetched. So they were looking for some property that came off the Port-au-Prince in Hapai. So on their way back to Vava'u. Among others, there was a box containing sundry small articles and a pocket compass. The latter he did not know the use of, and had scarcely yet examined. During the whole day it was nearly calm, and the paddles were for the most part used. A breeze, however, sprang up after dark, accompanied with a thick mist, and taking it for granted that the wind was in its usual direction, they steered the canoe accordingly, sailing for about 2 hours at the rate of 7 knots an hour. As they did not reach the shores of Vava'u, the thought now occurred to Mr. Mariner that the wind might possibly have changed, and in that case, having no star for a guide, a countenance of their course would be exceedingly perilous. So they're traveling by the stars, right? And it's foggy. It's foggy and they have no stars to guide them. But they've been sailing for about 2 hours, and what are they going to do? He therefore searched for the compass to judge of their direction, when he was much alarmed to find that the wind had chopped round nearly 1/4 of the compass. He mentioned this to the king, but he would not believe that such a trifling instrument could tell which way the wind was, and neither he nor any other chief on board was willing to trust their lives to it. If what the compass said was true, they must indeed be running out to sea to an alarming distance, and a night was already set in, and the gale strong. Their situation was perilous. Most on board, however, thought that this was a trick of Mr. Mariner to get them out to some distant land, that he might afterwards escape to Papalangi. Afterwards escape to Papalangi. Papalangi is what they call the white people, but Papalangi is also a place, because Papalangi means a cracked sky or broken sky, a cracked open sky, a sky that opens, right? That's where they believe white people came from a crack opening in the sky. And even Finau began to doubt his sincerity. Thus he was in an awkward predicament. He was certain they were going wrong, but the difficulty was how to convince them of what was now, in all probability, essential to their existence, for the weather threatened to be bad, and it seemed likely that the night would continue very dark. At length, he pledged his existence for their safety, if they would but follow his advice and suffer him to direct their course, and that they should kill him if they did not discover Vava'u or some of the other islands by sunrise. The pledge was rather hazardous to him, but it would have been still more so for them all to have continued the course they were then in. They at length consented. The canoe was immediately close hauled, and Mr. Mariner directed their steering. The gale luckily remained nearly steady during the night, but all on board were in great anxiety during the whole time, and Mr. Mariner were not the least so among them. So now, Mariner is saying, let me use this compass to lead us back. We're lost. The wind has pushed us in a different direction. It's cloudy. The sun is going to go down, and we're not going to have stars to guide us. So let me use this instrument, this compass, to lead us back to Vava'u. I bet my life on it. If we don't see Vava'u by morning, you guys can kill me. And look how that's hazardous to me, but I put my life on this. Trust me on this. Let's use this compass and follow my direction. Where everybody on board was like, nah, we don't know nothing about no compass. Even Finau was like, we can't trust that. We don't know what that is or how it works or whatever. And some of the guys were like, he's trying to get us out of here. He's trying to get us to a place somewhere where the Palangis are, and try to get us killed or something, right? Like as if Mariner was being treacherous or something. And Mariner puts his life on it that, no, I'm going to lead us back home. In the morning, as soon as the light was sufficiently strong, a man who was sent up to the masthead discovered land, to the great relief of their anxiety, and the rising sun soon enabled them to recognize the shores of Ava'u. To the wonder and amazement of Finau, who did not know how to express his astonishment sufficiently at the extraordinary proprieties of the compass. How such a little instrument could give information of such vast importance produced in him a sort of respectful veneration that amounted to what was little short of idolatry. So the sun is kind of coming up now. Morning's coming. Somebody has sent up the mast to look and sees land. The sun comes all the way up and they see the shores of Ava'u. And Mariner is saying that Moingangongo was so, or Finau was so astonished that he was praising, giving veneration to the point where he almost worshipped the compass, according to Mariner, right? Just a little short of idolatry. For finding that Mr. Mariner could not explain why it always pointed more or less to the north, he could hardly be persuaded but that it was inspired by a Otua. Basically, if you're now saying, because apparently Mariner couldn't explain why, so Mariner didn't know exactly why the magnets pointed the way they pointed, right? Mariner didn't know that, but he did know how to use the compass, and that was about it. But it didn't change Finau's mind at all. All Finau knew was this compass thing. It was created by the gods. This is an invention. This is an idea of the gods for it to give direction. Something, information of vast importance to be in this thing had to have been created by the gods. There is no other explanation, right? He was so pleased with this property of the compass that he almost always carried it about him afterwards, using it much oftener than was necessary, both at sea and on shore. So, yeah, when you get somewhere and you know how to get anywhere, it seems like he trusted the compass. He had faith in the compass, right? Because they tested it out in the ocean when the fog was up, when there was no stars, they couldn't see. There's no stars to lead and guide them, and the compass did, right? So he carried it everywhere, and he looked at it. Perhaps it might give a message of something or whatever, right? But he is totally sold on the compass or the technology as something of God. It may easily be supposed that Finau, with such an inquiring mind, took delight in everything that afforded him instruction or satisfied his curiosity. He was accustomed to visit the houses of canoe builders and carpenters that he might learn their respective arts, and he often made very judicious observations. He frequently went into the country to inspect the plantations and become a very good agriculturist, setting an example to all the young chiefs that they might learn what was useful and employ their time profitably. He used to say that the best way to enjoy one's food was to make one's self hungry by attending to the cultivation of it. So we see the characteristic of Moingangongo, Finau Moingangongo, how curious he was. He went to the shipbuilders, the gardeners, the house builders, whoever he went to learn. And now he's saying here that the best way, right, to enjoy one's food is to make oneself hungry by attending to the cultivation of it. Like it tastes better because I grew it, is what Finau is saying. There were many individuals, however, at the Tonga Islands that possessed uncommon intellect as well as good disposition of heart, but none of them seemed endowed with an extraordinary desire of investigation which so strongly characterized the king. Among the most remarkable of these were his uncle, Finau Fisi, and his friend, Halaapi Api. The first of these was venerated for his wisdom. So Finau Fisi was known for his wisdom, a quality which he derived rather from his great experience, steady temper mind, natural solid judgment, than from the light of extraordinary intellectual research. And that's where wisdom really comes from, right? Finau Fisi trusted on his experience, his when you're not quick to anger, when you're under control, and all you're using is your mind in every situation. You don't lose your cool. You're going to learn something when it's cold. You're going to learn something when it's hot, no matter what. And Mariner is saying that Finau Fisi, his uncle, and Halaapi Api thought the same way. Experience over research, intellectual research, basically, is how they learned, which is the only way they could learn out there in Tonga. Nevertheless, the divine quality was marked in his countenance. There was something graceful and venerable about his forehead and brow that command respect and confidence. He had no quick sparkling look of ardor, nor fire of impetuosity, but his deep-seated eyes seemed to speculate deliberately upon objects of importance and utility. He was very curious, and everything he looked at, everything he saw, he was always wanting to learn something. That's how Boyagogo was. His whole physiognomy was overshadowed by a cast of sublime melancholy. But he had been one of the greatest warriors that Tonga ever produced. The islands of Fiji, when he derived his whence he derived his name, had been the scene of his achievements, and the stories recorded of him equaled those of romance. So he's talking about Finau's uncle, Finau Fisi. Oh yeah, we're talking about Finau Fisi and experience. So they're saying that they call him Finau Fisi because that's where he gets the name Fisi. It had been a scene of his achievements, so he's achieved much there, and the stories recorded of him equal those of romance. That's how good Finau Fisi's life was in experience. It's like reading a romance story or a romance novel. That's how engaging or that's how captivating Finau Fisi was or his life was, um, that he compared it to a romance novel. His arm had dispensed death to many of Fiji warriors, whose surviving friends still recollect the terror of his name, but all the warlike propensities of his mighty chieftain now seem absorbed in a conviction of the vanity of and absurdity of useless bloodshed. So he used to. Finau Fisi, Finau Ukalala's brother, Moegagogo's uncle, used to be a great warrior and has stories of his own, have killed many Fijians while he was in Fiji. One of those, right? Where even the survivors who still lived in Fiji talk about Finau Fisi. That's who Finau Fisi was. But in his age, as he aged, his warlike propensities of his mighty chieftain now seem absorbed in a conviction of the vanity and absurdity of useless bloodshed. Like now, it's just vanity, and it's just absurd for anybody to go and just kill for free. But in his youth, heck yeah, that was the thing to do. Just like in any youth, mind of a youth, heart of a youth, soul of a youth, they're going to grow up and they're going to mess up and make mistakes and they're going to think and feel that way, right? This is worth something. The way I'm acting, the being, macho and all that. And then when you grow up and you gain more experience and wisdom, then you realize, oh, it is a waste of time. But uh, during that time, it's an experience that's going to add to wisdom through the knowledge later on in years, which how it is for everybody. And nothing seemed to afford him greater pleasure next to giving counsel to those who asked it than to play with children and to mingle with unwanted cheerfulness in their amusements. So unwanted was spelled like wanton, want, um, what's the word? Why am I thinking wonton? Am I hungry or something? Anyway, mingle with unwanted cheerfulness in their amusement, but it's spelled like the want. Damn, I can't think of the word. Disturbance, anyway, with undisturbed cheerfulness in their amusement. Finau was perhaps about 50 years of age and was become rather corpulent. Footnotes here says no native of Tonga knows his age, for no account of the revolution of years is kept. So nobody knows their age. Mariner's guessing. Finau 50. His whole demeanor was not erect, powerful, and commanding, like that of his brother, the late king. But his slow step and steady action showed something of solid worth in his character that wrought respect in the beholder without any mixture of fear. It has just been said that Finau performed most of his warlike feats at the Fiji Islands, and the greater part of the time that he was there, Halaapiapi, though a much younger man, about 30, was his constant friend and companion. So there you go. Halaapiapi and Finau were friends and constant companions while they were in Fiji, fighting at many wars. And we talked about the many wars Fiji had against each other and how it became a playground for warlike men of Tonga to go and jump in those battles. They always fought together and were said to have owed their lives to each other 30 or 40 times over. Their mutual friendship was very great, although in many respects their characters were wildly different. To form a tolerable idea of Halapiapi, we must conceive to ourselves a slim yet athletic and active figure of a middling stature, full of fire and impetuosity, endowed with a mind replete with the most romantic notions of heroic bravery. For somebody like Halaapiapi to have such control of his emotions, spoken of in the last chapter, that's the same type of temperament that real fighters have. The guys who train, the guys who have, hours of sparring, running, working out, that's the temperament real fighters have. They're not bothered by street fights. They're not bothered by being bothered, right? Because they know how to fight. They know what it is, and they know that it's worthless or useless to fight somebody who hasn't been to war or been to battle. So is the character of Halapiapi, full of mischief, without malignity, wrought up with the most exuberant generosity. The heat and inconsistency of youth was in him, strangely mixed with the steadiness and wisdom of age. No man performed more mischievous tricks than he, at the expense of the lower orders, and yet they all liked him. If any other chief oppressed them, they flew to Halapiapi for redress, and he always defended their cause as if it were his own, often at the risk of his life. And this he did seemingly from pure motives of pity. So Halapiapi, being a true warrior, didn't like bullies. Halapiapi, even though he messed around with the lower orders, right, playing tricks on them and playing, what do they have now? Pranks, right, on lower orders. If any of the chiefs messed with these lower orders, they would go to Halapiapi, and Halapiapi would fight their case for them, right? Even to the point where he would risk his life, all out of pity for these lower orders, because they can't do or say anything because there's higher up chiefs they're doing and saying whatever they want, even into oppression. That Halapiapi ain't having it, nah. We ain't having that. We ain't doing that. So he's a very loving and kind guy. At the same time, he was a fierce warrior. Halapiapi was. He would weep at the distress of which they complained, and the next moment his eyes would flash with indignation at the injustice of the oppressor, and seizing his club, he would sally forth to redress their wrongs. If he committed any depredations himself, he would sometimes be equally sorry and make ample reparation. On other occasions, however, his mind would remain for a considerable length of time in the same wild and unforgivable disposition, and the report of his depredations would reach the king's ears, Finau Ulukalala, who would say, "What shall I do with this Halaapiapi? I believe I must kill him." But Halaapiapi neither feared death, nor the king, nor any other power. There was nobody but liked him, and yet everybody feared him. His mind was like a powerful flame constantly in action and constantly feeding upon everything that could be made food of. Talk to him about battles, and he looked as if he were inspired. Relate to him a pathetic story, and the tears would run down his cheeks faster than you could count them. Tell him a good joke, and there was nobody would laugh more heartily than he. Old Finau used to say that Halapi Api would prefer 2 days hard fighting without food more readily than the most peaceable man would 2 days food without fighting. No sooner did the younger Finau come to be king than his friend Halapi Api, to the astonishment of everybody, left off his mischievous tricks and ceased to commit any acts of depredation. So Halapi Api was basically a hero for the weak. Even though he says that Halapi Api did do things, right, to the lower orders himself and did play tricks and pranks and whatever depredation acts he did, he still fought. But he reacted the way the emotion naturally reacts to things, right? A good story, a sad story, a funny story reacts well. But and Finau Ulukalala wanted to kill him at some point. But as soon as Finau Ulukalala died and Finau Moegago came to power, being him, it was Moegago's friend. He stopped doing that other nonsense. Basically, grew up to uh, to be a good friend to Finau. On being asked by Mr. Mariner the cause, he replied, "The present king is a young man without much experience, and I think I ought not to throw obstacles in the way of his peaceable government. The old king had great experience and knew how to quell disturbances. Besides, he was fond of fighting, and I gratified my humor without caring about the consequences. But such conduct now might be bad for the country." Halaapiapi's countenance and his whole figure very well portrayed his character. His small, quick eye gave an idea of wonderful activity, and though he looked as if he were a mischievous fellow, his general physiognomy expressed much generosity, good sense, and understanding. His whole body was exceedingly well proportioned, and he was considered one of the best made men at Vava'u. He was beyond conception, swift of foot. To see him run, you would think he outstripped the wind. The grass seemed not to bend beneath his feet, and on the beach you would scarcely expect to find the traces of his footsteps. Sounds like Mariner went back and told some good stories too. He ran so fast that the grass didn't even bend. He ran so fast that across the beach that his footsteps you couldn't even see him behind him. But Hala Api Api knew what it was. He didn't care that Finau Ulukalala. He wasn't scared of him, and it's a natural characteristics of Tongas too that if there is somebody that a lot of people praise or worship or fear, there are guys out there that would do the opposite just to show everybody that I'm not afraid of that person. I don't respect that person like you do. I don't. They don't want to look like simps. They don't want to look like they're kissing ass for free, right? And that's why when you'll rarely find guys starstruck over people, right? Celebrities and whatnot. You rarely find Tongans starstruck like that, right? They're usually starstruck on the peaceful guys, the intellectual guys, the musicians, and all that. But as far as great accomplishments that people praise somebody for, they don't do that. They don't have starstruck in Tonga like that, where especially if it has something to do with being tough and being manly. If you came in and walked in and you acted and looked tough and manly, there's a lot of guys that would not care to the point where they would show you that they were afraid. Hala Api Api was like that to Finau Ulukalala. Finau Boingangongo, on the other hand, he said, this young king is young and he's peaceful. He has nothing to prove, so I don't have anything to prove. Where when Finau Ulukalala, his dad, was in power, he had too much to prove. He loved fighting too much. So I had much to prove, to the point where I didn't care what prank or what I did to anybody or whatever, simply because I wanted him to know, or anybody to know, that I didn't have any fear against anybody or towards anybody. Such is a general sketch of some of the principal men of Ava'u, who had always behaved in a most friendly way to Mr. Mariner, and with whom, of course, he could not help feeling great regret at parting. His attention was soon occupied, however, by the arrival of the ship at the Hapai Islands, where for 2 days she stood off and on between the islands of Ha'ano and Lifuka. So all these were just memories that we're talking about of Mariner thinking back on the memories he had with Halapi Api, with Ulukalala, with Moegagogo, and the other chiefs and whatnot, and giving a description of who they were. And now, if you can imagine going from Vava'u to Hapai, now they're in Hapai and they are about to change direction or change course or activity. Let me change activity real quick. Two people still here, huh? All right, so now they're about to, so they get to Hapai, right? A vast number of canoes came alongside from the neighboring islands, and several of them, of the chiefs, were allowed to come on board. Mr. Mariner now took the earliest opportunity to procure the escape of any Englishman who might be there, and to fulfill the sundry commissions he had received from his Vava'u friends. Robert Brown, the cooper of the Port-au-Prince, who, it will be recollected, was the last man that remained on board with him, was now under the protection and in the service of Vuna, who, with Tupoto'a, came on board the Favorite. That was the name of the ship, the Favorite. He therefore immediately took proper means to get him on board and had the pleasure of succeeding. Other Englishmen were at the more distant islands, and Robert Brown was most generously undertook to go for them, at the risk of being detained, or of the ship's departure without him. The captain advised him not to go, if he valued his own liberty. But he replied, it would be very hard indeed if one Englishman could not assist another, although it was at his own risk. Good on you, Mr. Brown. So they get to Hapai, and Tupoto'a and Vuna are there, and they get Mr. Brown on board. And now Mr. Mariner is saying, all right, get all the Englishmen from Hapai that want to go back to England. And Mr. Brown said, oh, I'll go get them. I'll go bring them so we can go home. But the captain is saying, no, you can't go. We might leave, and you want to sacrifice your liberty for that? And Mr. Brown tells him, hey, man, I can't leave without my friends, right? It's very difficult for me to just leave these guys here. We all want to go home, right? As good as the situation may be, there's no place like home, is what it comes down to. And that was good of Mr. Brown to do that. He was particularly interested in the fate of Samuel Carleton, the boatswain of the Port-au-Prince, who had always been his intimate friend. This man's case was rather hard. When he was in England, he was about to be married to a young woman to whom he had been long attached to begin the world with. In some business on shore, he thought it would be more prudent to go first another voyage and increase his means, and accordingly he entered on board the Port-au-Prince. So this guy, Samuel Carleton, jumped on the Port-au-Prince. He was about to get married, right? So he's engaged, jumped on the Port-au-Prince because he didn't have enough means in England to make money. So he was thinking, let me go sail. And usually when they go sail, they get things enough, or at least as we know from the beginning of the book, they pillaged enough to come back with enough monetary products to start a living with. And Mr. Brown wasn't about to leave him there, so he went to go get him. During his residence at the Hapai Islands, he was always in a low and almost desponding state of mind, and his friend, Robert Brown, most cordially participated in his distress. At the moment we are speaking of, the latter conjectured that he was at Nomuka and was resolved to run the greatest risk to effect his escape, as well as that of others whom he supposed to be with him, particularly George Wood, the carpenter's mate. So there are a few Palangis here, right? Robert Brown, there's Samuel Carleton, George Wood, all these men that were on the Port-au-Prince that want to go back home. Accordingly, after much trouble and offer of considerable rewards, he persuaded 4 of the natives to accompany him to Nomuka, a distance of 50 miles in a single sailing canoe, where when he arrived, to his great mortification, he found that the object of his search, as well as 2 or 3 other Englishmen, were gone to the island of Tonga to assist the friends of Tupoto'a in the garrison of Hihifo. He then deliberated whether he should push on to Tonga, a distance of 60 miles further, But the men, um, let's see. But the men refused to take him, and he was obliged to return, bringing with him Emmanuel Perez, a Spaniard, and Joseph, a black, who both belonged to the Port-au-Prince. So this Emmanuel Perez, the Spaniard, and Joseph, a black guy, he was able to get back. But this Samuel Carlton, who Robert Brown went to go look for, he went to Tonga with a few other Palagis. George Wood and a few of the Palagis, they went to Tonga to help out with Tepoto'a's friends out in Hihifo. In the meantime, 3 more Englishmen arrived on board: Nicholas Blake, a seaman, and Thomas Eversfield and William Brown, lads of 17 years of age who afterwards returned on shore, refusing to go away. Footnote says, it must be mentioned that 2 or 3 men belonging to the Port-au-Prince got away about 18 months before in a schooner which happened to touch at Vava'u. Among these was William Towell, who lately resided in Cross Street, Westmoreland Place, City Road, and followed the business of a hairdresser. Mr. Mariner was at the period at the Hawaii Islands and knew nothing of the schooner's arrival. We should also state that the conduct of one of those who choose to remain behind was very suspicious. He did not originally belong to the Port-au-Prince, but was taken by her in one of her prizes, a Spanish vessel. When he gave himself out to be an American, though it appeared afterwards that he was a native of Cornwall. He resided at Hapai with a chief named Liu Fao, who was known to be a cunning, treacherous character, and according to the accountants of many natives, this man was as bad. Thus much, however, is certain that when Mr. Mariner took leave of Finau, the latter, taking him on one side, whispered to him to have watchful eye upon Liu Fao and the Pa'alangi, mentioning his name, for what they certainly meant to take a vessel the first favorable opportunity. When the ship arrived at the Hawaii Islands, this man came on board, expressing his wish to return to Europe, and as he was not to be judged upon mere hearsay evidence, the captain gave him a pair of trousers and shirt, and he fulfilled his duty with the rest of the sailors, though there was, as Mr. Mariner conceived, a great deal in his manner and watchful eye that looked badly. Just upon the ship's departure, however, he got into a canoe and told the captain that he had changed his mind and would remain there where he was, and went on shore without returning the trousers and shirt. Mr. Mariner afterwards heard in China that he had served the captain of the schooner before mentioned exactly in the same way. The gentleman from whom he had this information in China received it from the captain himself, who at the same time expressed his firm opinion that this man meant to take a European ship the first opportunity, or at least to be instrumental in doing so, by giving the natives instructions how it was best to be done. We forbear repeating the name of this individual, lest the reports of him should have been greatly exaggerated. There is too much reason to fear, however, that his designs were had, and this notice may serve as a hint to ships who may hereafter touch therefor. So there were Palangis that were bad guys that were in Tonga that convinced a bunch of Tongans that he wanted to take a ship, or at least instructed some of these Tongans how to take a ship. That he had his own treacherous intentions. So that's who that guy is. They don't ever say his name though. That's interesting. Oh, wow, figure. This only happens when I'm reading this book. This must have something. Okay. Mr. Mariner was much disappointed on finding that his adopted mother, Mafihape, was gone to a distant island to see some friend. The presents that he brought for her, therefore, he left with one of her relations to be given to her as soon as she returned, with some presents from himself to keep in remembrance of him. He sent on shore to the island of Foa the older Mataapules, the confidant of Halaapiapi, and communicated to him the message from that chief. He also communicated to Tupoto'a the king's advice to him, never to attempt the invasion of Ava'u, but to confine himself to the cultivation and prosperity of his own islands, to which he replied that war was necessary to keep the minds of his chiefs employed, that they might not meditate conspiracies, that he should therefore direct his arms against some of the garrisons at the island of Tonga. He had the greatest respect, he said, for Finau's family, but he could not help it if some of his chiefs, as on the late occasion, made attacks upon Vava'u for want of other employment. One of the warriors who had been engaged in that unsuccessful expedition was now on board. He had been wounded in the arm by a ball from Mr. Mariner's musket. So Mariner goes and tells the Poto'a, gives him the message from Finau. Cultivate your own island. Do not come and attack Vava'u. Um, Finau said, we're at peace. Take care of this place. Tupoto'a then tells him, well, I can't help it if some of my men, because this right here, this is an occupation that keeps their minds busy, that keeps their minds off of conspiracies. In order for me to satisfy my men's minds of conspiracy or to turn on our own island, I have to employ them with war, because that's all some of these chiefs want to do is to be employed by war of conquest, right? And so we're going to Tongatapua and we're going to do that there. Yeah, we have men there. That's where I'm focusing my armies. But I can't help if some of my chiefs want to go to Vava'u and attack Vava'u for the purpose of occupying their minds in employment of war, right? Then you think of 300 Leonidas. What is your occupation? Right? Oof. Oof. About a 12-month before, he laid a wager with Mr. Mariner that he could not hit a mark which he put on a coconut tree at a certain distance with a musket. The bet was a pig. Mr. Mariner, so this is a year before. A year before, that's what the bet was. So is this the Poto I was talking to? That Mariner couldn't hit a mark on the tree with a musket. Mr. Mariner accepted the wager, and the king promised to pay the pig if he lost. It happened, however, that he missed, and the king lost a pig. The king lost a pig? Did I read that correctly? He had the greatest respect. So he's talking about Poto'a, the chiefs. One of the warriors had been bored. He had been wounded in the arm by a ball from Mr. Mariner's musket. But told me before he laid a wager with Mr. Mariner that he could not hit a mark which he put on a coconut tree at a certain distance with a musket. The bet was a pig. Mr. Mariner accepted the wager, and the king promised to pay the pig if he lost. It happened, however, he missed, and the king lost the pig. Oh, okay. So he was betting with Mr. Mariner. The warrior, as soon as he saw Mr. Mariner on board, came up to him and said, smiling, I find you can shoot better than you did at the coconut tree. So the guy on the ship that Mr. Mariner hit with the musket, right? Um, During war, the year before, he bet Mariner that he couldn't hit a mark on the tree, and the warrior, as soon as he saw Mr. Mariner on board, came up to him and said, smiling, "Oh, the warrior that he hit. I find you can shoot better than you did at the coconut tree." Mr. Mariner inquired after his wound and was happy to find that it had got nearly well. The ball had passed through the fleshy part of the arm. So they're talking about war and talking about how, hey, I remember you hitting that tree. You missed, but you're a better shot than you were last year. Mariner asked about his wound. So this is how it was. They conversated about war, and even though they were enemies during battle, um, once battle's over, it's all over. That's it. The battle's over. They came and talked and conversated. Hey, you missed that, but you got my arm. That's crazy. For them to have that type of conversation shows you the character of the people of the culture. It was very ludicrous to hear the different strange excuses and apologies made by the natives in regard to the affair of the Port-au-Prince, with the view to persuade the captain that they had nothing to do in it. Many said that they were not on board and knew nothing about it till it was all over, and then they were very sorry indeed to hear of it, and thought it was a very bad thing. One man acknowledged that he was on board, being there out of curiosity, but that he knew nothing beforehand of the conspiracy and took no part in it. Another acknowledged that he was on board under like circumstances, and he was quite astonished when they began to kill the white men. That's an interesting point right there. Let me get it back. Just in case of diet and a pack salad. Pack of salad with ranch, tomatoes and a cucumber. One tomato, one cucumber, and cheese. That was an interesting. That was interesting. So the conspiracy, and they may be lying too, right? We don't know for sure, but some are saying, as far as the Port-au-Prince is concerned, right? And obviously, Mariner thinks that that's ludicrous, but many said that they were not on board and knew nothing about it till it was all over. And then they were very sorry indeed to hear of it and thought it a very bad thing, right? They're saying that this is ludicrous that they would even think this way. That's not true. But we're going to look at it from both sides. One man acknowledged that he was on board, being there out of curiosity, but that he knew nothing beforehand of the conspiracy and took no part in it. Yeah, I don't know about that, right? How true is that? You're just on board. Hey, let's go. Let's check it out. And then everybody starts killing. Like, oh, snap. I didn't know this was going on. What were we doing? That's kind of hard to believe. But, okay. Whatever. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He was, yeah, I don't know about that. Another acknowledged that he was on board under like circumstances, and he was quite astonished when they began to kill the white men. There's another one. He declared that he saved one white man's life, but while he was turning round to save another's, the man whose life he had just saved got killed on the spot. I don't know how believable that is, buddy, but usually when you start something in battle, just like in a fight, and we're told this all the time, right? Tongans, when we're I know this when we go play rugby. When back in the day, if we ever go, we go play. If we ever fight, if one guy starts fighting, everybody jumps in. We're all just gonna fight, right or wrong. Where we may lose the game, but we're not gonna lose the fight, right? And so to hear that from that guy saying, I was just there, I don't know what was going on, that's kind of hard to believe. Benefit of the doubt, sure, I'll give him that if it was true, right? And then the other guy, I tried to save this guy, pull him away, and then I went to this guy. Like, you're not going to be saving somebody while bats are swinging and spears are being chucked at people and all that. Like, I don't think that makes sense that that would happen. So for somebody to say this, yeah, seems like a lie. Benefit of the doubt, all right, whatever, right? There may be guys that that we're doing this, but I'm not too sure about how accurate that storytelling is, especially now. That was 4 years ago, right? Especially now for them to be telling stories like that. So, yeah, believe what you may, I guess. Several regretted they were not at Lifuka at the time, as they were sure they could have saved several of the Papalangis, of whom they all affirmed that they were very fond. Okay, these guys are getting more and more simping, basically. Like, dude, I wish I was there. You know, it was 4 years ago. I wish I was there. I would have saved them. Like, no, come on. 300 guys with clubs and spears and just chucking and everything. Like, they're your family and they're your friends. Of course, you're not going to. But to appease the captain and all the white people that are on the ship right now, yeah, sure. They're probably just saying that because of that, which is why I think Mariner thought this is all ludicrous, all these stories, right? Because he was there, he could see what was going on, and it didn't look like anybody was saving anybody. Tupoto and Vuna both asked Mr. Mariner why he had chosen to remain at Vava'u, and if they had not behaved equally kind to him as the king or any of the Vava'u chiefs. To this he replied that he preferred Vava'u to Hapai Islands, as the latter place brought to his mind many disagreeable recollections. It was where his ship had been destroyed, and where he had met with many insults from the lower orders on his first arrival. Besides, he acknowledged that he preferred the disposition of the Va'u people generally, and that he thought it would be highly ungrateful in him to leave the protection of a family that had befriended him all along. After 2 days' stay at the Hapai Islands, Captain Fisk ordered the natives out of the vessel and directed his course to the Fiji Islands to lay in stock of sandalwood for the China market. The China market back then was big. But speaking on Mariners, how he thought about the Vava'u people and the Hapai people, it seems like the Hapai people were just more savage minded and were more cruel. They were like so scattered sporadically, outside of being intentionally peaceful. They were always buck wild for some reason. Maybe something in the water, maybe something in the blood, whatever. But Mariner felt safe with Finau Ulukalala in Vava'u, who was in Vava'u before, right? With Vuna, as a matter of fact, before Vuna ran away, to Fiji. But yeah, you'd want to live around peaceful people who all their only intention is to grow food and to take care of each other and not have to worry about the occupation of keeping the minds of the warriors busy in war. Yeah, I agree with Mariner on that. And it's interesting now that Captain Fisk is saying, let's go to Fiji, let's go get sandalwood for the China market. This is 1809, 1810. And this is China market's big, apparently, back then in the early 1800s for them to say, yeah, China buys a lot of sandalwood. Let's take all the sandalwood over to them from Fiji. Interesting how that ties into today's modern the market, right? Economy. Like China has had a big economy even back then because they're taking stuff over there. And now China's economy, or there's an economy of Chinese people in Tonga, right? The character of the Hapai people is not naturally more treacherous than that of the Vava'u, but as they have more petty chiefs whose interests they have to consult, the opportunity of treachery is perhaps more frequent. Oh. So they had too many young chiefs that weren't mature enough, that weren't wise enough, that haven't been through enough where it seems like they were all agreed for the most part on, yeah, let's go to war. Yeah, let's go to war. Let's go kill them. Right? Where Vava'u was filled with wise guys or wiser guys to be like, nah, we've been through all that. Peace it suits us much better than war. So they were just as treacherous. Hapai is just as treacherous as Vava'u, but Vava'u has enough older folks and wise guys to know and understand that war isn't good. Where Hapai, Vava'u, right? Hapai, on the other hand, had too many petty chiefs on the lower levels who are coming up from war and have that same temperament as Finau Ulukalala was, which all they wanted was conquest. And if our great circumnavigator, whose death the world had so much reason to deplore, had known them in this respect, he would not have misnamed them friendly. Wow. The Friendly Islands, y'all. Right here in Mariner's book, right? Mariner and John Martin are both agreeing, right? If our great circumnavigator, talking about Captain Cook, if our great circumnavigator, whose death the world had so much reason to deplore, had known them in this respect, known the Tongans, how treacherous they were, if Cook knew how treacherous the Tongans were, he would not have misnamed them friendly. That's what Mariner and John Martin are saying. Captain Cook misnamed the Tongan people the Friendly Islands because he didn't truly know them. Not like Mariner knows them. Not like John Martin knows them based on these stories of them being there. The Friendly Islands, right? But we know that story from before. In fact, they had deliberately planned a conspiracy against him, and which infallibly have been put in execution, if the chiefs who planned it had not disputed about the exact mode and time of making the assault, found at that time tributary chief of Hapai, Finau, at that time tributary chief of Hapai Islands, Tuku'aho being king, was not the designer of the conspiracy, but he gave counsel and advised respectingly. So it's saying that Finau wasn't the designer of the conspiracy, but he gave counsel and advised respecting it. So when Captain Cook was in Hapai, they planned to take him and slaughter him and everybody and take the ships and whatnot. Mariner is saying that Finau wasn't the designer of that plan, but he was the counsel because he was the tributary chief to Tuku'aho here in Hapai. The other chiefs proposed to invite the captain, Captain Cook, and his officers to a grand bome, a night dance by torchlight. Bome. That's what bome means? Because that's a name. Bome is a name. The other chiefs proposed, so talking about the chiefs and Captain Cook, the chiefs that was there with Finau being the main chief in Hapai, at that time Captain Cook was there, those chiefs proposed to invite the captain, Captain Cook, and his officers to a grand bome. Bo means night, and me apparently means dance by torchlight. And at a signal to massacre him and his officers and all the Marines. But Finau Ulukalala objected to this. as the darkness of the night would be unfavorable to their operations in taking the two vessels, and proposed rather that it should be done by day, and that they should seize the opportunity of making the attack on the occasion of a grand entertainment which was shortly to be given to him in honor of his arrival, and after they were all destroyed, the men who would naturally come in search of him were to be conducted to the farther part of the island under pretense that he was there, and they were then to be destroyed in like manner. So it was Finau's idea to not attack Captain Cook when he showed up. It was his idea to do that in the daytime. These guys wanted to do it in the nighttime. The chiefs wanted to do it at nighttime. Finau is saying, no, let's do it in the daytime. That way we can have this big old feast, and those the other chiefs wanted to do a pomee, but it seemed like Finau wanted to do faiaho, which is in the daytime, right? A celebration in the daytime, put the weapons under the food and everything, and then attack them there. That way it's easier. The daytime, they can't leave and come back and accuse us, or, bring back people who are going to come and basically take us out and kill us. So it was Finau's idea to do that. Let's see this thing. Bomee, interesting. Bomee means night dance. Through torchlight. Night celebration. Okay. Night celebration through torchlight. A night dance by torchlight. Bomee. Interesting. Yeah. I know the name. That's a name. But I didn't know the definition until now. So if you know what pomee is, it means night dance by torchlight. So a me'e is a me'e dance. Okay. Thus the two ships, their crews being so weakened, might be taken, as they suppose, with ease. So Finau is saying, if we let them all come off the boats, off the ships first, then we can have the party during the daytime, and then we'll kill them all then. That way they're off of the ships. Where the other chiefs wanted to have a pomee, where some of a lot of the people on the ships, the Marines, are still going to be on the ships, and that's not going to be safe for them. The entertainment was prepared, and Captain Cook and several officers being invited were present. It happened, however, a little before the appointed time when the signal was to be given, the most of the chiefs still expressed their opinion that the nighttime would have been better than the day. And Finau, finding that the majority were of this opinion, was much vexed and immediately forbade it to be done at all. So right before it was supposed to happen, this is how close Captain Cook came from dying in Tonga. He ended up dying in freaking Hawaii, right? Because they did the same thing, the celebration thing, and killed him in Hawaii. But this is how close Captain Cook came to dying in Tonga, where Finau Ulukalala said, all right, we're going to have the celebration in the daytime. The food was ready, celebration and everything, for the other chiefs to be like, nah, man, we need to do this in the nighttime. And when he saw that there was enough, that the majority wanted to do it in the nighttime, and some of them agreed in the daytime based on the plan that it'll bring them all off the ships during the day, where some of them may be there at night, it was split. The plan was split, which Finau Ulukalala said, all right, forget it. The ceremony's about to start. We're about to eat and everything is there. No plan, no killing, none at all whatsoever. This plan is done. It's out. Thus, no signal being given, the amusement went on without interruption, and Captain Cook and his officers were much pleased with their entertainment, acknowledging it to be far better than any other that they had received at the Friendly Islands. Mr. Mariner had this information at different times from several chiefs who were present, and in particular from Finau himself, the father of the present king and son of the chief who was at the head of the conspiracy. As every information must be interesting. Oh, wait. So it says right here, far better than any other that they had received at the Friendly Islands. So they're saying that this is the best celebration. Captain Cook is saying this is the greatest celebration we've ever had ever since we've been here in any part of the Friendly Islands. This is the best celebration we have ever been a part of. And that's how distracted they were, where they're saying this is the best celebration we've had in Tonga ever since we've been here. That just goes to show how well prepared Finau's plan was in the daytime, right? Mr. Mariner had this information at different times from several chiefs who were present, and in particular from Finau himself, the father of the present king and son of the chief who was at the head of the conspiracy. So Finau Ulukalala's father, Finau, they call him Finau Maufanga, he was the one that was the head of the plan to kill Captain Cook. It was the Finau family that planned that entire conspiracy, right? Because Mariner heard from Finau himself, the father of the present king. So Finau Ulukalala, the father of Finau Moingangongo, who's the present king, and son of the chief who was at the head of that conspiracy, which means Finau Ulukalala's father was responsible for the conspiracy on Captain Cook. But apparently, based on this part, they wanted to do it at nighttime, where Finau Ulukalala said, because he's the tributary chief of Hapai, he said, no, we're going to do it in the daytime because we want all of them off of the ships. So it was his father that freaking planned this whole, that was the head of this conspiracy against Captain Cook. Interesting. The Finau family is interesting. As every information must be interesting which regards the history or fate of this great and good man to whom society owes so much, we cannot omit mentioning some circumstances subsequent to his death upon which the above anecdote so naturally leads the mind to reflect. The people of the Tonga Islands behaved towards Captain Cook with every external demonstration of friendship while they secretly meant to kill him. And the people of the Sandwich Islands, although they actually did kill him, have paid and still continue to pay him higher honors than any other nation of the earth. So back then, even though Tonga was planning, or even though the Finau family in Hapai was planning to kill Captain Cook, they're the ones that are praised as the friendly islands around the world, right? Where Hawaii, or the Sandwich Islands, although they actually did kill him, have paid and still continue to pay him higher honor than any other nation on the earth. Hawaii pays Captain Cook highest honor of anybody on earth back then, even though they killed him. Which really seems like they're paying him honor because they don't want anybody to go and take them out, which would be the more, right? The thing that Finau Ulukalala feared was for Captain Cook's military to come from England and take them out. And Hawaii now fears that at this point in time. But they give him praise and praise him and all of that. Apparently, the biggest praisers to avoid perhaps being slaughtered by the British military. So it looks like it wasn't all a unified thing there either. But to each his own as far as judgment. They esteem him as having been sent by the gods to civilize them and one to whom they owe the greatest blessings they enjoy. So back then, what John Martin is saying is that the Hawaiians esteem Captain Cook as having been sent by the gods to civilize them, and one to whom they owe the greatest blessings they enjoy. Is a little bit of civilization, right? That's what Hawaii is praising Captain Cook from. Now that was 1779. 1804-05, Mariner runs into King Kamehameha, who's the chief out there. He said Kamehameha, and said that Kamehameha wanted Mariner to stay there to help him even push it even more into Western civilization as his secretary. That's what Kamehameha wanted Mariner for. It says here, his bones, the greater part of which they have still in their possession, they devoutly hold sacred. So the Hawaiians have Captain Cook's bones and hold them sacred. They are deposited in a house consecrated to a god and are annually carried in procession to many other consecrated houses, before each of which they are laid on the ground, and the priest returns thanks to the gods for having sent them so great a man. You see how similar that sounds to Tongan, the Hawaiians? The theory of them being the same people back then, or at least more similar, of the Tongans and all of Polynesia being more similar back then, not as the same or exactly the same by any means, because it does state a lot of differences between the different islands, but the similarities, the building houses to the gods, the priest speaking for the people and speaking for God when they're there at the houses, different houses, the similarities that they have with the Tongans. When the Port-au-Prince was at Oahu, one of the Sandwich Islands, Hawaii, Mr. Mariner was informed of the above circumstances by an Englishman, or perhaps an American, who was a resident there. So there was a Palangi in Hawaii that told Mr. Mariner this story about Captain Cook. His name was Hair Bottle, Hare Bottle, Hair Bottle. He seemed a man of some information and respectability, and was formerly the mate of an American vessel, but in consequence of some disagreement with the captain, he chose to remain at those islands, where he now acted in the capacity of harbor master to the king and pilot to all ships that arrived, from each of which he demanded $5 or $6 for his services. So there's a Palangi guy that served in Hawaii. We're talking now here, early 1800s. There was more Palangis there. No, just like in Tonga, there was more Palangis and different Samoa, Fijian Hawaiians there in Tonga than we ever thought either, as well. Looks like Hawaii is the same way. This person informed Mr. Mariner that the natives of Hawaii, returned. He spelled it Hawaii. Returned very few of the bones of Captain Cook, but chiefly substituted the bones of some other Englishman that was killed on that melancholy occasion. That's weird, right? They kept the bones of Captain Cook and gave the bones of some other guy back to England, I guess. Little counterfeit going, huh? Unless they can actually find, do the bone and teeth dental to figure that out. Damn, how many more? I'm thinking this freaking black mold on this book that's probably making my nose run wild and itchy and whatnot. Old freaking book. Okay, where were we? The bones of other Englishmen. When Mr. Mariner afterwards understood the Tonga language, he conversed upon the subject with natives of Hawaii at Vava'u, who corroborated everything that Hairbottle had said. So Hairbottle is who he met in Hawaii when they first on their way over to Tonga, and stated moreover that the natives had no idea that Cook could possibly be killed, as they considered him a supernatural being and were astonished when they saw him fall. The man who killed him was a carpenter, either in the apprehension that Captain Cook was, at the moment, ordering his men to increase their fire, or not knowing him to be the extraordinary being of whom he had heard so much, for he lived a considerable distance up the country and was not personally acquainted with him. So whoever killed Captain Cook, they're basically saying it may have just been, it was a carpenter, first of all, and he just heard that Captain Cook was invincible, so he went to go prove that he was or wasn't, right? Because he didn't know him that well, and he obviously wasn't in society, close to society as everybody else. So this may have just been, an accident. Not an accident. I don't want to say accident. This may just have been a one-off of what the entire community and people were thinking about dealing with Captain Cook. But it seems like they were at fire. They killed the man who carpenter increased their fire, or not knowing him to be the extraordinary being to be heard so much, for he lived considerable distance of the country and was not personally acquainted with him. The flesh of their illustrious victim was shared out to different gods and afterwards burnt, while the bones were disposed of as before related. Among the natives of Hawaii, from whom Mr. Mariner heard this, one was a chief of middling rank, the rest were of the lower order, but they all agreed in the same statement. They had not been eyewitnesses, however, of that melancholy transaction, for they were all young men. But they spoke of these things as being universally known at the Sandwich Islands and beyond all doubt. So this is the sharing of stories orally, because they didn't read it right. They all shared the same story, right? It's easy when they all share the same story. All of them have the same story, and so forth. But now it's a different story. It is related in Cook's voyages that as soon as he received his wound, the natives were seen to snatch the dagger by which his death was effected from each other's hands, displaying a savage eagerness to join in his destruction. So the first guy hits him with the dagger, and then everybody else grabs the dagger from each other, and they're taking him out to take out this invincible, apparently invincible guy from heaven, from the gods. In all probability, however, this eagerness to seize the dagger was prompted in each by the wish to be possessed of an instrument which had become consecrated, as it were, by the death of so great a man. At least this is the presumed from what would have been the sentiment had it happened at the Tonga Islands. So they're snatching the dagger and snatching the dagger, but it seemed like they wanted the game ball. This dagger took down this god, and they wanted the game ball. Here, let me do it. And they all wanted. It seemed like they all wanted to be the last one to stab, so they can keep the knife that stabbed Captain Cook. They were taking it from each other to make it look like they wanted to jump in on the killing. But at the same time, he's saying if it was in Tonga, they would want the knife to keep, because it's the knife that killed the god. And he's saying that's probably what it was. At length, the favorite, that ship, arrived at Pau, one of the Fiji Islands, and anchored off Vuiha. Vuiha, it's spelled Vuiha. Famous for sandalwood, for which the captain soon began to treat with the natives, and before the ship's departure, laid in several tons. They got several tons of a sandalwood from Fiji. So when they're going around taking getting stuff from places, right? The Port-au-Prince went and pillaged and stuff and whatnot, but there are places you can't. You have to trade, and so he had to have had something to trade that's worth several tons of sandalwood to take to China, to the China market. In the meantime, Mr. Mariner went sundry times on shore and had opportunities of receiving confirmations of what he had heard from Kauboala. Remember, Kauboala is the one that had been in Fiji, talked about Fiji and how he helped one group in Fiji to go to war and battle, and they gave him a new canoe and whatnot. And because he was there and he went to go get sandalwood, told all these stories to Mariner, and Mariner is now going around confirming Kauboala's stories with the natives. The natives appeared to be a race considerably inferior to the Tonga people, partaking rather of the Negro cast of countenance and form. So he's talking about all of the different how they look, difference between Tongans and the Fijians at this time. So far as Mr. Mariner had opportunities of observing, their domestic comforts were also much inferior to those of the people he had just left. They do not oil themselves, and to this he attributes the coarseness and harshness of their skin, which is so different from that of the Tonga people. Their hair was somewhat more curly and rather disposed to be woolly. Their whole external character, taking it generally, seemed fierce and warlike, rather than brave and noble. The descriptions that he has for the Fijians at this point is he's describing Africans in those times, right? They don't look as fierce. They don't look as noble. They don't have that disposition, right? Just off of the look alone. Their only dress was the mahi. Remember, the mahi is when you take the tapa because it's tied up all the way up to here and it goes down and covers you. And mahi is when you take the tapa and you tie it up high for you to go into the water or go into war. So war or water, you wear the mahi. You tie up the mahi. Also, it makes it say the tattoos are visible so you can see which side of the war you're on by exposing the tattoos in Tonga. He's saying here that in Fiji, but they always wear it, for modesty, they always wear it all the way down in Tonga. Where it's saying here, their only dress was the mahi. And this nakedness of appearance serves at once to sink them in a degree of civilization below the natives of Tonga and the society of islands, the society islands. What did we determine society islands were? Didn't we say that was Tahiti? But if he's talking about the Fijian islands as nothing but mahi, then the movie that we're watching of the Hawaiians with the chief of war, where they're walking around with the mahi, why didn't he say the Hawaiians were the mahi or that the Fijians only wore mahi just like the Hawaiians? He didn't say that. He said that the mahi dress, the nakedness of appearance, serves as once to sink them in a degree of civilization below the natives of Tonga. Now, he didn't say that about the Hawaiians either. We're just talking strictly about the mahi itself and how he's saying that they look less civilized because of the mahi. But he didn't describe the Hawaiians that way, which means do the Hawaiians really walk around with the mahi like they do on the movie Chief of War? Or did they also wear the tapa all the way down for him to describe them as looking less civilized than the people in Tonga or Society Islands? I think we determined that the Society Islands were, I think the Society Islands we determined was Tahiti, right? We're just going to take a look at the Society Islands and see what. French Polynesia, right? So now we know that the dress in Fiji seems like it was only in Fiji. Let's see. Tahiti, Papeete, Bora Bora. Yeah, the Society Islands are this French Polynesia, and he's saying that the name appears as once to sink them in a degree of civilization below the natives of Tonga and the Society Islands. But he never said that about the Hawaiians or anybody else, just the Fijians. That's an interesting observation. It is to be lamented that Mr. Mariner had not an opportunity of drawing a juster comparison between the natives of these islands and the people with whose manners he was so well acquainted, but dreading that some accident might again detain him. When on the eve of returning to civilized society, he refrained from going on shore so often or so far as he otherwise might have done. So Mariner is basically saying that he wanted to go home so bad and feared not making it home that he didn't explore. It's like he didn't need to explore anymore. And he wished that he would have drawn people more, gone out there and drew to have a better picture of everybody. But he refrained from going on shore um, for that reason. He felt curious to discover what opinion they had entertained of the natives of Tonga, and found uniformly that they were considered a very treacherous race, whilst the Tongans, as already related, accused the Fiji people of possessing the same bad character. So here he is in Fiji asking Fijians, "What do you guys think about the Tongans?" The Fijians say they're a very treacherous race, right? Which, after reading this entire thing, yeah, they're very treacherous at many points in times. But at the same time, Mariner in his mind is like, well, the Tongans accuse you guys of the same thing, right? Because we talked about how war happened in Fiji. They would go war against each other in Fiji. Tonga, they're doing the same thing. But to occupy the minds of the chiefs and warriors, if they didn't want to go war in Tonga, they came to Fiji and did it there, right? And that made them think about the Tongans as treacherous. Um, From all that he has seen and heard, however, he is disposed to believe that the Fiji people fight with more fury than they of Tonga, but that the latter, Tonga, where they have been seriously injured, harbor sentiments of revenge for a longer time. Mr. Mariner witnessed no instance of cannibalism among them, but they made no scruple to acknowledge that such instances were very frequent, and Gamwala's account of the feast of Siasia was confirmed by the report of several of the natives of Pau who spoke of it with much indifference. So he didn't see any cannibalism going on, but they're saying, yeah, but it goes on. But the PGs are telling them, but it goes on often. And there was somebody that was there when Galboala was there saying, yeah, that confirming Galboala's story of the 200 barbecued bodies. He had it also confirmed by a native of Tonga, residents at Pau. So there's Tongans in Fiji too here, right? We already know that they're staying everywhere. Everybody's staying everywhere. He had it also confirmed by a native of Tonga, resident at Pau, who acted as his interpreter and who was present at this horrible feast. So there's a Tongan guy who was present at this feast in Fiji when Kamwala was there. The language of these people is very different in sound from the Tonga language and is much more harsh to pronounce. It is replete with very strong percussions of the tongue, and with a frequent rattling of the letter R. It is rather a curious fact, if true, and appears to be so from all we can learn that the language of the Sandwich Islanders is more similar to the Tonga language than that of Fiji, though not more than 1/9 part of the distance from Tonga. So Hawaii is 9 times further away from Tonga than Fiji is. But he's saying that Tonga and Hawaii share closer ties to looks and language than they do with Fiji. Obviously, right? Because we know that earlier in the story, he asked the old man in Hawaii where the Fijians come from, and the old man says, I don't know, we were here, and the ship just showed up, I don't know how many generations or centuries ago, but they just showed up, and now they're in Fiji. There were several Englishmen or Americans at the island of Pau, but none of them wished to come away in the favorite, except one. And as Captain Fisk had already more hands on board than he wanted, and as this man was not thrown accidentally by shipwreck or otherwise among these people, but had left his ship voluntarily, the captain did not choose to take him. It is much to be regretted that most of these men were, from all report, but in different characters, and had left their respective ships from no good motive. They had frequent quarrels among themselves in which 2 or 3 were murdered. Mr. Mariner's information upon this point is partly from Fiji natives who visited Tonga, and since his return to London, an Englishman who lived 2 or 3 years at Pau, and whom he accidentally met near town, declared that he was heartily glad to come away, being afraid to live on the same island with his companions. So basically, Mariner's saying that there were a lot of Englishmen in Fiji, or from America in Fiji, that stayed in Fiji on their own because they wanted to, right? On their own. What word am I looking for? Volition, right? They wanted to stay there on their own volition. They weren't kicked off. It wasn't shipwreck. They wanted to stay there. They chose to stay there, and because there was too many hands on the ship on the favorite already, Captain Fisk said no, no more hands. But Mariner ran into one later in later years, Englishman who stayed in Fiji and said, "Yeah, I was in Fiji, but I wanted to leave because I didn't want to stay with those white boys." He's saying, "I didn't want to stay with those guys." So they knew each other, and they knew that they were all probably just bad dudes, right? Who argued a lot and fought a lot on their ships, and decided to stay in Fiji. So that's interesting to know that there were a lot of Englishmen and Americans in Fiji. Oh shoot, where was I? Okay, the footnote says this man's name was Thomas Lee. This is the guy who Mariner ran into in England talking about Fiji. He lived at that time at Hendon and was frequently employed in bringing hay to London. He has since left that place and is somewhere in town, but we have not been able to find him. He was very well acquainted with Kamoala, the Tonga Matahapure. Wow. Thomas Lee, who stayed in Fiji, was well acquainted with Kamoala, who stopped by at Fiji. Dang, these relationships cross so, right? Interchangeably, if that's the word I'm looking for, but so often and so common to cross paths from Tonga and Fiji and Samoa and Hawaii and England and America that we don't know who met who or who ran into who at this point in time. Like I never knew Mariner ran into King Kamehameha back then, even though back then he was chief, known as chief, that they call him king now. But it's interesting how they cross paths like traffic today, right? We don't know who we cross paths with. The favorite, having laid her in her store of sandalwood after the 5 or 6 day stay at Pau, weighed anchor and resumed her voyage, and in about 5 weeks arrived at Macau. At an early opportunity, Mr. Mariner procured the following certificate from Captain Fisk, thinking it might be of service to him, being totally unknown to anybody. This is to certify that the bearer, William Mariner, belonged to the unfortunate ship, the Port au Prince, that was cut off at the Hawaii Islands, and that he was taken from thence by the brig Favorite, as he had but little money in his possession. So basically, Mariner writes a letter, a note, an IOU. Sounds like he had about $50 or $60, part of which had been given to him by his adopted mother, Mafihape. The remainder he procured from a female native of Lifuka by giving her consideration for them in beads. These dollars belonged originally to the Port-au-Prince. So they had money off of the Port-au-Prince. That's crazy that they saved it for that many years to give Mariner for his trip back home. Because Mafihape says Mafihape gave him money from the Port-au-Prince that he found, obviously knowing the value of money to him. And having $60 plus one of a few dollars from another female in Lifuka, trading her for beads. Interesting. So Mariner gave Fisk this note, this certification, I guess as an IOU. As he had but little money in his possession, he resolved the first opportunity to enter on board one of the East Indian Company ships bound to England and work his passage home. It happened, however, luckily that he fell in with the officers of the company's cruiser, the Antelope, who, taking an interest in his story, corroborated by the account of Captain Fisk, they invited him on board the Antelope, where, with the permission of Captain Rose, he remained for a couple of months, till an opportunity offered of going to England. So they get to Macau, right? The favorite, Captain Fisk, is headed to China. They get to Macau, and Mariner writes him a note and said, "Here, I'll give you my signature, appreciation, and all that. This may be worth something to you." And then he asks this next ship, Captain Rose, if he can jump on there because they're on their way to England. And Captain Rose is so entertained by the stories itself because Mariner's saying, let me come on your ship and I'll work my way to England on your ship." And Captain Rose is saying, "Oh, I heard those stories. You just come over here and tell these stories, right?" No, they just want to hear what happened to Mariner the past 4 years. He is happy to acknowledge through this medium his deepest sense of obligation to this gentleman in particular and to his officers in general for their extraordinary civility and kindness, nor must he omit Captain Robert Wellbank of the Honorable would be a ship, East India Company ship, the Cuffnells, who on the recommendation of Captain Ross received him on board his ship and gave him his passage to England. Okay, so this is what I mean by traffic, right? He was on the favorite, gets to Macau, gets on the Antelope, goes somewhere, gets on the Honorable in East India, goes somewhere, gets on the Cuffnell, right? He's just making passage, hitchhiking his way back to England. This is how they used to hitchhike back then, jumping on ships and working their way on the ship as a hand on the ship to get back to the country that they want to go to, which is a great trade, I think. The Cuffnells arrived at Gravesend in June 1811. So 1805 to 1811, that's 6 years. not counting when he left in '04. Or was it '04 or '05? Let's see, he was 13, 91, '01. He was 10, 13, he was 14. So 13. So 1803 or 1804, he leaves Gravesend. Now it's 1811. So that's 7 years. So he's been gone a good anywhere between 6 to 7 years, or at least we can say safely 6 to 10 years. Well, it's 1811, so yeah, it would have been 6 to 8 years. The Cufflinals arrived at Gravesend in June 1811 when Mr. Mariner went on shore and immediately came up to town. But while looking out for his father's house, who in the meanwhile had changed his residence, he was impressed and sent on board the tender. He immediately wrote to a friend to acquaint his father with his arrival and his situation. His father, not less overjoyed than surprised at this unexpected information, repaired on board to visit his son, whom an hour before he had imagined, if alive, to be resident among a savage people on the other side of the globe, with little or no view of making his escape. Dang. His dad, just an hour before, his dad was thinking, damn. And this, we're talking about 6 or 7 years later. My son, William Mariner, is freaking, he's probably on the other side of the world, never going to get back and probably going to die there just the hour before to hear news. Oh, no, William's back. Like, what in the heck? Yeah, I think anybody would be ecstatic. The footnote says Mr. Mariner's father had heard from William Towell, who had escaped about 18 months before him, that his son was living and still at Vava'u, but he had represented his situation as rather hazardous and hopeless. So William Towell said that it was hazardous and hopeless in Tonga. Well, Mariner's home now, guys. After 7 years long, there you go, 7 years long, hopeless absence, the hour of meeting arrived, the circumstances of sentiments of which we leave to the imagination. Mr. Mariner found his father in mourning for his mother. Each had much to relate, but this was not the time for free and unreserved communication. While the son was a prisoner, the father had to exert himself to procure his liberation, in which he at length succeeded after a week's detention. What? Did I miss a whole bunch here? They're free. He's out. He's free. He's there. They're unified, or they're reunited. Unified. They're reunited, and everything is all good. Each had much to relate, but this was not the time for free and unreserved communication. While the son was a prisoner, when did he become a prisoner? The father had to exert himself to procure his liberation, in which he at length succeeded after a week's detention. Okay, so Mariner is detained, who had meanwhile changed his residence, who was impressed. So while he was looking for his dad in town, he was impressed and sent on board the tender. That's what I don't know, which is an old term for something, because he was detained on board the tender. Oh, tender, like money. Pay for your fare is basically what it sounds like. He was impressed and sent on board the tender. And tender, as you know, would be money, right? Um, so he may owe. That would explain for all his travels he may owe. That's probably why he wrote that note to that first captain and said, "Here, I'm using this as tender. Here, this may be worth something," and he let him go. And then through the other ships, it seems like the other ships got to be paid. That's what I'm putting together. That's what I'm connecting as far as the dots and reading between the lines. Because while he was on board the tender, he immediately wrote to a friend to acquaint his father with his arrival situation. So that's why it says that this was not the time for free and unreserved communication because he was detained. That's why it says, while the son was a prisoner, the father had to exert himself to procure his liberation, in which he at length succeeded after a week's detention. So Mariner was detained for a week. He was imprisoned, and it sounds like he was imprisoned because he had to pay his fare for all these ships that he hitchhiked on. That's what I gather. Let me know if you gather something different. As it may be considered interesting to know the fate of all the ship's company of the Port-au-Prince, we shall conclude this chapter with a list of those who, along with Mr. Mariner, survived her capture. Besides the 8 natives of the Sandwich Islands, the Hawaiians, there were belonging to the ship 52 persons. 26, including Mr. Mariner, were on board at the time the ship was taken, and of those 22 were massacred, and of these, 22 were massacred on the spot. So that would put 4 because there's 26 on board, 22 were massacred. That left 4 were massacred on the spot. Of those who were on shore, 3, besides Mr. Brown, were whaling masters. The whaling masters were also murdered, making in all 26 who lost their lives on that disastrous occasion. The remaining 26 are correctly accounted for in the following list. So 26 is the total number of people who got off the Port-au-Prince, Palagis. That's the total number who ended up in Tonga. 26. The 8 natives of the Sandwich Islands probably had a hint from their countrymen, Tui Tui, to keep themselves out of harm's way, which they effectually did. The ensuing statement, therefore, is drawn up in the order in which the different events happened. So the total number of people who were at least not killed that day on the Port-au-Prince when they got to Tonga was 26. So they were out and about. And during the time they were all in Tonga, one or a few of them at a time started leaving on ships that did show up to Tonga. Mariner missing it, right? All of them. And eventually Mariner finally finding a ship to get on and leaving. And there's a list of all the happenings. It seems like there's a list of who and what happened to them. Okay. Position. Okay, so this is a list of people. Okay, let's see. And we'll see if there are any Tongan names that match how these English names sound, so we can see if any of these names are still in Tonga today. All right, let's see if any of these names are still in Tonga. John Scotland, he was a gunner. Jacob Myers, seaman. William Ford, seaman, left Nomuka in a small paddling canoe and were never afterwards heard of. Supposed to have been lost, as a paddle belonging to that canoe was found shortly afterwards, washed on shore at Nomuka Eiki. So there you go. John Scotland, Jacob Myers, William Ford. They tried to leave Nomuka on a little paddle boat. They found one of the paddles a little shortly after, so they're assumed to have been lost at sea. John Hearsay, sailmaker, left the island of Tonga in an American vessel, but was accidentally drowned at the Fiji Islands, as reported by some Englishmen at Fiji. John Hearsey. William Towell, Captain Steward. Robert Fitzgerald, a boy, left Vava'u in the Mercury, a Botany Bay schooner. Am I pronouncing that right? Scooter? Is it scooter or shooter? I know it has something to do with fishing. Um, Schooner. A sailing ship with two or more masts, typically with the four masts smaller than the main mast and having gaff rigged lower masts. A schooner. Shooter. I was called shooter. Well, scooter, shooter, tomato, tomato. So anyway, a scooter, another sailing ship. So John Hearsey left the Tonga Islands, an American vessel, accidentally drowned. William Towell, we see that. Robert Fitzgerald left Vava'u in the Mercury, Botany Bay schooner, at a time when Mr. Mariner was at the Hawaii Islands. William Towell lately resided in Cross Street, Westmoreland Place, City Road. Hugh Williams, seaman, Jeremiah Higgins, and John Parrish, landsman, escaped from Vava'u 13 months before Mr. Mariner in the Hope. Captain Chase of New York. This is the captain that refused to take Mr. Mariner on board, stating that he had hands enough. Jeremiah Higgins now resides at Ellsbury. John Watson, seaman, had gone to the Fiji Islands with a Tonga chief, but Mr. Mariner did not hear anything of him there. So long, John Watson. Samuel Carleton, boatswain. George Wood, carpenter's mate. William Singleton, landsman. Alexander McKay, a boy, were at the island of Tonga at the time the favorite arrived off the Hawaii Islands and lost that opportunity of escape. Mr. Mariner has since heard that Samuel Carleton came away afterwards in another vessel. Another opportunity, another thing we hear about people escaping. And it's not like they're escaping, like trying to get away, like escape, because they weren't truly being held prisoner, right? They just, a ship came by, they got on, and they left. Samuel Carleton, George Wood, William Singleton, Alexander McKay. Those are the guys that were in Tonga when Mariner got to Hawaii to get all the palangs off of Hawaii. Those guys were in Tonga helping out. Damn, Alexander McKay, a boy. They were all in Hihifo. James Waters, ordinary seaman, refused to leave Vava'u on account of age and infirmities. James Waters, all right. I don't know what that would be. Vai, Waters means Vai. Wota, any families with that name? I imagine it'd be hard to keep track of that if they didn't know how to read and write yet. Nicholas Blake, he was a seaman. William Bronx and Thomas Eversfield, their boys. John Roberts, a black native of the island of Tortola, a boy, refused to leave the Hawaii Islands under various pretenses. Wow, they refused to leave Hawaii. Nicholas Blake, William Brown, Thomas Eversfield, John Roberts, the black native, refused to leave. Thomas Eversfield has since been some years in London. Oh, okay, so Thomas Eversfield ended up. So I imagine they end up leaving at some point or another, just like everybody else. Everybody, back in those days, it seems like everybody just jumped on ships and just traveled, right? Traffic, just traveled. Everybody's hitchhiking their way across the Pacific Ocean and end up everywhere. And then eventually they end up at home. And some just end up where they stay, where they're at. William Stevenson, a child of 2 years of age, native of the Sandwich Islands, the son of a British subject resident at Oahu, when the sailmaker had taken him in the Port-au-Prince, at the request of his father that he might be brought to his relations in Scotland to be educated, this child was adopted by the daughter of the late king, widow of the late Tonga, and was much noticed. He probably still remains at Vava'u and must now, in 1827, be about 22 years old, being 2 when he left his father. Well, there you go. William Stevenson, a child of 2 years of age. Interesting. Robert Brown Cooper. Um, there's a room called the Cooper, right? Yeah, I can't remember what the Cooper was. A Cooper. What is A Cooper? Cooper. Hey, Cooper. Skilled craftsman responsible for making and repairing wooden casks and barrels used for storing and transporting goods, such as whale oil, water, salt. Okay, so a Cooper was a woodworker. All right, who we got? Robert Brown, he was the Cooper. Thomas Dawson, Thomas Brown, landsman. Manuel Perez, seaman. Joseph, a black. These came away with Mariner in the favorite. All but Thomas Brown were under necessity remaining. Okay. So these are the last ones. Robert Brown, who's a Cooper. Thomas Dawson, seaman. Thomas Brown, landsman. Manuel Perez, seaman. Joseph, a black. What's a black? A blacksmith? Just says a black. A black, and there's a dash. Like a black ash? What was he? I'm assuming he's a blacksmith. These came away with Mr. Mariner and the favorite. All but Thomas Brown were under the necessity of remaining in the East Indies. So all but Thomas Brown. Thomas Brown got employed on board one of the homeward bound vessels from China and came to England in the same fleet with Mr. Mariner. Thomas Dawson has since been in London. So that's the travelings of all the people who survived the Port-au-Prince. Or at least those are the fate and the endings of those guys who they didn't kill on the Port-au-Prince on that day in Hawaii by the Tongans. That's what ended up happening to them. Mr. Mariner regrets very much not being able to furnish dates. His only method of keeping time was by cutting certain notches on certain trees unknown to anyone. But even with such rude memoranda, he was only out in his circulation one day at the time of the favorite's arrival. Damn, that's pretty good timekeeping. That's how keen he was, his mind is. Because it says right here that he was only off by one day. From 4 years, when he got to Hawaii, all the way till the favorite picked him up. Says right here, his only method of keeping time was cutting certain notches on a certain tree that nobody knew about. He was only out in his calculation one day at the time of the favorite's arrival. He was off by one day. That is great timekeeping, but that also goes to show how educated he was, how keen he was at keeping record, right? So as far as record keeping, that just is a better testimony of the book itself, just by how on he was about keeping time while he was in Tonga. In the ensuing pages, that's a lot of days. You're talking about 365 lines, and you're lining up an entire freaking coconut tree from the bottom all the way up, right? Of course, you can do probably 100 lines on one row and then 100 After 3 lines, you know you're there 300 days. So you're after 3 lines, you're there a year. So 365 days in a year. So after 3.5 lines, you're there a year. He was there 4 years. So there were, I guess that'd be, easy enough to keep, I guess. But still, to keep track of it, to have the uh, the patience and the discipline to keep track is amazing. All right, where were we at? In the ensuing pages, we shall endeavor to furnish a correct view of all the manners, customs, and sentiments of the Tonga people that have not been mentioned or sufficiently dwell upon in the foregoing part of the work, and which it is hoped will be found exceedingly interesting as offering a striking contrast to the manners, customs, and sentiments of civilized nations. Upon these subjects, we shall speak in the following order: rank in society, religion, civil and professional, religion, religious ceremonies, knowledge, dress, domestic habits, pastimes, music and poetry, and lastly, language. There you go. That is the end of Mariner being in Tonga. He is in England now. He's with his father and tells a story of where everybody ended up that survived the slaughter Port-au-Prince. 26 people ended up in Tonga all at the same time, along with the 8 Hawaiians who nobody touched. And John Martin and Mariner, assuming the Tui Tui probably warned them, let them know, hey, don't worry once we start slaughtering. But in my opinion, I think they were more closely in mind that they knew, because they warned the people on the ship that these guys are going to slaughter you, that they already knew. So once the slaughtering started, what they do, they just backed right up and let the slaughter happen. So that was chapter 3, and now we're out of the story. Completely out of the story. And we are going to go into the rest of the book, which this part, which is going to be all the logistics of Tonga and the Tonga people, behavior, culture, customs, and all of that. And that's probably going to be more boring, if you want me to be honest. But we'll go through it anyway, because it's part of the phasing of what we're trying to do in the bigger picture here. All right? So thanks for joining me. We need water bottles. I'll go get water bottles for the kalapu. Anyways, all right. So ends the story itself of William Mariner, Finau Ulukalala, and all these people. And I'm going to start editing the live stuff so that it falls into story mode, just like the first 6 chapters, and get it all set so that we can get it all ready for the next phase. Because after that phase, it's going to go prep itself into the phase 3, and hopefully, be able to start in phase 4. Anyways, thanks for joining. Malo, y'all. Any questions right now? Anybody got any questions about Tonga Islands and William Mariner or any other part of the story right now while I'm here? Go ahead and ask me. I'll chill here for a couple minutes and while you guys think of your questions. Other than that, y'all, I started this thing. We're in October now. I started this read 2 years ago. That was 2 years, right? The very first one. Let me see. Because we've come to the end of our journey as far as the story is concerned. But I really want to kind of go over what we've been doing. And look how long it's taken. Let me look at the video, see when it was posted. Because holy cow. Two years. It was sometime in September. Let me see. Took 2 years to read a book. That's crazy. There's people that read freaking 100 books in freaking a week. Here I am just. But at the same time, the whole process of editing and all of that was a great experience in itself. But wow, it took 2 years for me to get through the entire book. But let me look at some of these things. But to end it all, I guess, to close off the story part of this entire book, the experience, there was so much information as far as the habits and the behavior of Tongans back then that Mariner, I mean, and like thank God for both of them, Mariner and John Martin, who's able to articulate this and the preparation. It seemed like it was a godsend for John Martin to have been an author of uh, of books that talk about savage nations and savage worlds from his own perspective, creating these stories, right? Because he was a fiction novel writer about stories of people who would come over to England and tell stories about savage people. For him to create 14 or 15 books, for him to finally run into Mariner, right? All those books prepared him for Mariner to for him to run into him and tell that story, and for him to say, I couldn't have made any of this up. What you're telling me, couldn't have made any of it up. So it was a great opportunity. It was a great thing. It was just so much. That's why it took so long. Um, and plus other things. So anyway, it was a great experience, and we'll get into the logistics of it next time. Um, we'll see you guys then. Eh? Okay, go Doms. Tautoxio.